Alright, so tennis is a great sport because it can be played by people of all ages. You only need 2 people to play a game, and it's also very good for exercise. The only issue is when a lot of people try to get into tennis, they think that the first step is to go out and start swinging a racket, try to make contact with the ball, and or try to learn the rules of the game. So after playing tennis for 4 years, I realized that actually the best approach is to first learn what kind of racket you need. And looking at rackets nowadays, there's so many choices on the different specifications. I compiled a list of 4 different things that I think are most necessary for new tennis players or even advanced tennis players to look at when they buy a racket, and it'll give you a good starting point. So I'm going to go over the head size of the racket, the grip size of the racket, the string pattern, as well as the weight and balance of the racket. Head size, I think, is the most important aspect of your racket because it can make a huge difference in the way that you play. They range anywhere from 90 square inches to 110 square inches. On the smaller side, you're going to have a lot less power, but a lot more control, and it's also going to be a little bit more difficult to make contact with the ball, especially if you don't have the hand-eye coordination. On the larger side, you're going to have a lot more power, but not as much control. It is going to be easier for new beginners to hit the ball, though. So my suggestion is if you don't really know how good you are at making contact with the ball, especially in a racket sport, I would just go somewhere right in the middle. It'll serve you well for many years to come. So anywhere between 98 and 102 square inches is going to be a really good fit for you. Next, the grip size on the racket is kind of more of an injury hazard if you don't have it correct. So if your grip is too small, you're going to end up playing over time and getting tennis elbow actually. And if your grip is too big, you may not be able to get a full grip on the racket, and whenever you go to hit a ball, it'll walk right out of your hand. So all rackets have the grip size down here at the bottom. This one happens to be 4 1/4. And there's 2 ways to measure your grip size. You can either actually measure it with a ruler, and you're going to want to take your hand and measure from the middle bottom crease in your hand all the way to the tip of your ring finger. And you're going to do that in inches, and that's going to give you the actual measurement that you see on the bottom of the racket. Another field test version of measuring your racket grip is you're just going to want to grab the racket with your dominant hand and put your index finger from your opposite hand in between your palm and your fingers. So this racket's actually kind of a bad example for a correctly fit grip. I should be using a little bit bigger grip. In this instance, what you're going to want to do is just grab some extra grip tape and wrap it around the handle a few times until you get just the perfect grip. It's the same deal if you happen to be in between grip sizes. I would always suggest going with the smaller grip and just adding grip tape until you get the right fit. So next we have the string pattern of the racket, and this is more of a detailed aspect. It's still useful, especially when you're buying your first racket, especially because they just divide it into 2 groups. You have your dense racket string patterns, and you have your open racket string patterns. So this one is actually considered an open racket string pattern because it's going to have 16 strings going vertically and 19 strings going horizontal. On a closed string pattern, you would have 18 rings going vertically and 20 strings going horizontal. And the main difference there is on the closed string pattern, you're going to get a little bit more control as well as less power. And on the open string pattern, you're going to get more power and more spin, which also will convert into control. For your first selection, it's kind of just personal preference, what you think you're going to want to do, seeing there are only 2 options, so there isn't really one that's better or worse. I personally prefer the closed string pattern. So lastly, we're going to go over the weight and balance of your racket. Although rackets generally tend to only range from 8.5 to 12 ounces in weight, it doesn't seem like a ton, but after you've played a couple hours with one, if you played a full game, you'll be able to tell the difference between a heavy racket and a light racket. I would just suggest going straight in the middle for your very first racket unless you happen to be on the bigger side or the smaller side, in which case maybe add an ounce or 2. Anywhere from 9 to 11 ounces is going to be a very good racket for most people. This one's actually 10.9 ounces, so this racket actually is a very good beginner's racket. And then the balance is the last thing that I'll mention, and it's a little bit of an interesting concept. They will make it to where they take weight away or they add weight to the head of the racket. So if you were to hold the racket somewhere in the middle, which isn't right here, somewhere in the middle, if it was completely balanced, it would just sit there. This one's actually head light, So it's going to have more weight in the handle and less weight in the head. If you want a head-heavy racket, you're going to have the opposite effect. The only difference there is that it makes it a little bit more maneuverable. If you have a very light head with your racket, you're able to move it quicker from one direction to the other. So it's kind of just a personal preference. If you're getting your very first racket, I would suggest getting just a balanced racket. It's really something that you have to work towards to find out what it is that you like using. So those are the 4 main points to look for whenever you go to buy your first racket. That'll pretty much get you in the door. That'll get you a racket that should last you for several years. And then from that point on, you may want to start looking at more of the more advanced specifications, such as string type, string tension, and there's a whole list of that stuff. So thank you for listening.